Well, a very good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Adrian Reed, and I'm really pleased that in today's webinar, we're joined by Brian Hunt. I've known Brian Hunt, well, Brian, I was trying to work it out. I think we probably first met nearly 7 or 8 years ago at an IIBA event. And Brian is a self-employed business process consultant, also a CBAP. He has a wide-ranging career, in fact, starting as an electronics engineer. But what I've known Brian for is his real enthusiasm, passion, and professionalism around dealing with business process tangles. And I know that an enthusiasm that we both share is that business analysis is so much more than just the IT element, and in fact process and really understanding business situations and how those things get tangled and intertwined is so really important. So in this evening's webinar, Brian's going to be talking to us about the cause, removal and prevention of business process tangles. With a presentation about business process tangles, Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. I'm a business process consultant, CBAP and qualified electronics engineer, but my interest in engineering was developed by taking things apart to find out why they don't work, how to make them work better, or to do different things. And that same approach applies to getting the best out of business processes. Over my career, I've often come across business process tangles, multiple overlapping and inconsistent processes that evolve without guidance and ownership and result in a tangle of complexity where management don't really know what's happening between taking an order and delivering a product or service. So let me give you my definition of a business process tangle. How do we recognize that we are in tangled territory? Recognizing the problems, they may be indicated by a general awareness that things aren't running right. All of these are symptoms of starting to lose control of the business and its processes. Reactive ways of working may be implemented but not documented, so that each new problem or opportunity brings a different response. A short-term fix to get the job done is reused and modified to deal with another problem, and inconsistency becomes the norm. Asking, how did Fred do this last time? May get the answer, I don't know, he didn't tell anyone, just get it done today. If you haven't already done it, you may need to acquire and analyze data to find clues as to what's going wrong and where. Speak to the people at the sharp end, the delivery end of the value chain, where the product or service is delivered to the customer, because the first people to see problems may be the service and installation engineers having to work extra hours as they get more call outs, technical specialists and design teams fixing problems on customer sites, customer staff accepting customer returns, and of course the dissatisfied customers who start posting their problems on customer review sites and complaining on phone-ins. Now, if any of you have been had their flights disrupted by Ryanair, you'll be aware that that is a current business process tangle. Now, unless a natural disaster such as the Icelandic volcanic eruption a few years ago with a name that I'm not going to try and pronounce, or man-made issues like terrorism or strikes, the prediction of demand and how to satisfy it is reasonably straightforward, unless the processes come apart as key people such as pilots and cabin crew leave. Now, O'Leary, the head of Ryanair, has called pilots glorified taxi drivers, which is a bit of an insult to these highly trained people. But they are working, many of them, on the same basis as many self-employed business analysts. So they don't have security of tenure. So let's just look at some of the issues there. One of the big issues is a change from the April to March calendar, but they knew this was going to happen. Let's look at another example of a tangle. This was a well-reported one in 2014, where Network Rail left over 100,000 people stranded on trains and outside stations in London. It was a case study of how not to manage an engineering project. Multiple layers of management, but complex, tangled and unmanaged processes got in the way of their ability to deliver effective project management. Here are some of the issues. And the full report is well worth reading as a case study of how not to do things. So I'll just give you a moment to write down that URL. And of course, these slides will be available as a recording from the Blackmetric site later. Now, if a tangle just affects one person, that's the cost to them. A potential customer lost and a damaged reputation. And all tangles consume time and resources. And I believe that's a factor in UK productivity being amongst the lowest of the G7 economies. But that's another discussion. To understand why tangles happen, let's look at tangled earbuds. Do your earbuds look like this when you get them out of your pocket or handbag? I bet they weren't tangled when you put them away. Tangles happen when you're not looking. Business processes also get tangled when your back is turned. But why do tangles happen? To understand that, we can look at the 2008 Ig Nobel Prize for Physics that was awarded for the paper Spontaneous Knotting of an Agitated String. And this explains why earbuds get tangled and also helps us understand why business process tangles occur. Tangles depend on string length, string flexibility, points of contact, and external motion. Let's look at the implications for business processes. The greater the number of steps in the process, the greater the probability that it will tangle. In other words, the simpler the process, the less chance it will tangle. Flexibility. While processes should continually improve and be responsible to customer and business needs, all change must have an appropriate level of control based on risk, impact, and probability. Documents that define business processes and procedures must be owned and maintained so that these do not become outdated, ignored, and worked around, resulting in more tangles. Processes must all be pulling in the direction of creating value from order to delivery, and that's why visible and good leadership is vital. In some of the organisations I've worked in, unclear roles and responsibilities result in a muddle and inconsistent and low quality output. Points of contact. There's a straight line distance of about 2 miles between these 2 points on the map, but the tangled route is over 5 miles. More chance to get lost, break down, or get held up in traffic. You have to limit the number of handovers and people involved in the process. Each handover and interaction with the process must add value. Every contact with something outside the process, for instance, another department, an authorizing manager, or an IT system, is a point of contact that may contribute to a tangle. External motion. There are 2 types of company. Those that ride the waves of change and those that say, what happened? Jack Welch, the ex-head of General Electric, said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. The external forces that may act to destabilize and agitate processes can be classified under the headings of steeples: social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical. And these operate in a world that's increasingly complex and unpredictable, a world of VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if your business processes are tangled, they won't let you react fast enough. And if you can't react fast enough, wipe out. This is Flotsam from a Suffolk beach. Multiple components and connections created depending on the length, agitation, flexibility, and points of contact. Note that the thinner, more flexible white ropes have more tangles. There may be multiple processes colliding and tangling in the business. For Ryanair, that would include recruitment, retention, planning, scheduling, strategy, sales, and marketing. That collision of processes means lost flights and lost holidays to thousands of customers. With typical tangled end-to-end processes, things get done by the knowledge, goodwill, and endeavours of people in the process. Good people make bad processes work. A lot of the processes may be defined and communicated via email and are thus hidden from view. Poor handover between organisational silos is a common problem, so that what actually happens between receipt of customer requirements and the delivery of product or service can be unclear. Sometimes all that is known is that somehow things get done, but the path of events from receipt of customer requirements through to delivery is not clearly known, consistent, or controlled. In many organisations, this can be the difference between survival and death. In the early days, after an entrepreneur has set up a company, there may be sufficient informal control to ensure that process capacity and capability meet requirements by throwing people at the process when the natural capability of the process doesn't meet requirements. This only works so long as people are willing to support the process. Stress and work-life balance failure may mean that key members of staff leave. And I see this graphics not showing up too well here. I'll put that on the Facebook page that I've also set up to accompany this webinar. STEEPLE stands for social, technological, environmental, etc. There's also commercial competition. Multiple customers wanting more things, quicker, better, and with more variety will stress existing processes, especially when the limits of process capability and capacity are only found when output cannot keep up with demand. And I've sometimes found that companies don't measure the performance of their core business processes and then commit to selling things that they sometimes have to deliver at a loss. More variation increases the risk of tangles. The shortest path with the minimum number of steps and touch points has the fewest chances of tangles. Forces for change disrupt the straight line process flow from A to B. Workarounds evolve by trial and error. What works gets reused and built on. None of this may be visible to management. Process automation or outsourcing may make the problem of unsound processes even worse by reducing problem visibility and options for local control. The ideal process provides a consistent and uninterrupted straight line flow of materials, information, and decisions, each step in the process providing what is required at the right time, quality, and quantity. But when the process loops back to correct errors, to get more information, or to manage changes to requirements, this can result in a tangle when this is not part of a controlled process. Further loopbacks increase the complexity of the knots as they draw in other processes and people. And any arrow that is not pointing forward is waste that has to be paid for. But these tangles are often invisible to management. Let's look at the tangle path. A tangle path may be like this. Work starts and goes straight into unproductive time as instructions are queried. This unproductive time has to be paid for and subtracts from profits, sometimes leading to sales of products or services being sold at a loss to meet contractual requirements. Let's look at a simple process. Process accretion, the addition of more and more layers of process, may continue until the process structure collapses. So there's one workaround, another workaround, and another workaround. Layers of complexity evolve as workarounds are created to meet specific customer needs. Additional workarounds are placed on top of previous workarounds when new demands are presented. These short-term changes may then become embedded but invisible as they are not formally recorded. And the review may reveal that some process steps are not needed. For instance, process C here. Is that really needed, or can that be skipped over? The Grenier cycle, from Larry Greiner's article, Evolution and Revolution as Organizations Grow, describes how companies go through cycles of growth and crisis. In the first phase, growing pains, when an organization is growing quickly and becoming more complex since its original entrepreneurial start, the original management loses control and visibility of processes and firefights. So a more formal management structure is required. Managerial problems, practices, and therefore processes are not fixed throughout the life of an organization, but have to respond to internal and external change. According to the consultant Alex Sharp of Claritech, informal organizational processes start to fail when an organization reaches about 40 people. The Dunbar number also suggests that the most effective size of an organizational unit is about 150. The outdoor clothing manufacturer Gore-Tex limits factories to 150 employees because they believe that is the maximum size for a community to hold together. But the important point is that as an organization grows, the ways that used to work typically fail to keep up with the demands of growth and are likely to become tangled by workarounds and uncontrolled changes, additions and deletions. If this happens, the company will not have the agility or ability to respond and survive. As organizations become bigger, processes need the formal control of a documented management system. When a crisis point is reached, immediate action must be taken. If not, organizational failure may result. That's when root and branch business process review should be urgently taken and the resulting action plan implemented without hesitation. Invoicing is a common tangle area. It's a complex knot of internal and external procedures. These paper invoices were manually keyed and matched. A slow, inefficient, error-prone and expensive process justified by using cheap labour and outsourcing. Finding the information required to clear the invoice can launch a tangle, especially when it's not clear on who to contact for information and decisions, or where the original requisition has left and not left sufficient records. So the value of invoices here was 16.3 million. Unpaid suppliers would often stop work, resulting in panicked payments to restore service. Zurich Insurance research suggests that over 50% of small and medium-sized enterprises are owed money beyond their payment terms. And this total amount is estimated at a staggering 44.5 billion. So characteristics of tangles. They make your processes inconsistent and unreliable. They don't have owners. They limit an organization's ability to change and react. They become embedded and very difficult to remove. They waste time and resources. They aren't designed, they just happen. Tangles hide what's happening. So you may not be aware of them until things go wrong. Knowledge gets lost in tangles. The knowledge of how a process really works may be hidden in the tangle, scattered around an organization, uncontrolled, unknown, and in various locations. This knowledge may even be lost in legacy IT systems, which have taken manual processes and automated them without review and improvement, or when processes are outsourced to other companies. Sidney Yoshida's famous research from 1989, The Iceberg of Ignorance, showed that 96% of problems may be invisible to senior management. At the bottom of the hierarchy, 74% of problems at the bottom of the hierarchy, 100% of the problems are known. So to understand where the tangles are and the workarounds, speak to the people at the bottom of the organization, the people on the factory floor, the people in contact with the customers. They're generally the first ones to see the tangles and to work around them. Tangles provide traps for the innocent and unwary and hiding places for corruption and internal politics. They remove transparency. This picture here shows the different perspectives of people who are living with tangled processes. Note that the salesman is outside the boundary of the tangle and doesn't know or really care what happens as long as the sale goes through and he gets his commission. There are different stakeholder perspectives. There are winners and losers. The student, focused on paying off her loan, welcomes the overtime. And this contrasts with the overworked middle manager with a young family who must keep his job. Some people benefit. Tangles can provide job security and status. The person who knows how to make things happen despite the tangles has the power of people depending on them, even when this may not be visible in the organisational chart. And I found these characters both in public sector and in too big to fail organisations. Removing tangles may threaten their jobs and expose what they really do with their time. I'm reminded of the manager near to retirement who spent most of his day either in meetings or buying things from eBay for his model railway. So where do you start to remove tangles? You need to step back and understand what's going on before trying to unpick the tangle. How many free ends are visible? Where do they go to and come from? What can be removed to simplify the tangle? Do you remember the unnecessary process step a few slides ago? Where does the tangle start and finish? There may be more than one termination. Where are the connections? Where are their breaks? What bits need to be preserved and what bits can be cut out of the tangle? Is there anything you can bypass or cut out, throw away now? Apply must-go rules. What must, should, could and won't be in the tangle? If we know the inputs and outputs of a process or a process step, then we can make a logical deduction of what tasks are required to join these 2 points and where they are hidden in the tangle. The measures, the SLAs, the KPIs, and process performance indicators that an organisation uses to manage its business may provide clues as to what processes are needed to provide these measures. For example, if there is a measure of the number of repaired widgets, there must be a process to repair widgets. However, they may be historic activities that lack any logical purpose or value. For instance, producing reports that no one reads or performing acceptance tests on already validated product. It may be best to remove the tangle of step B and start again by asking what inputs step C needs to do its task. You may find, like the Roman dodecahedron, you may find artifacts that have no obvious value. And if anybody knows the purpose of these dodecahedrons, do let me know. Over 100 of these have been found in Europe. Nobody's been able to say what they are for. So the vital steps: locate the processes and activities within the tangle, classify and catalogue them, evaluate what don't you need, what needs to work better, what's duplicated, what needs to be created, correct, amend and formalise the process, review the connections in and out of the processes to ensure that these are connected together as part of an effective organisational system. So don't just look at the inputs and the outputs, look at the controls and resources that go to the process. Clarify who does what. The simple RACI tool is very powerful in removing tangles. And here's a simple example of a RACI. The accountable person is the one who answers for failure and success. One person may be accountable and responsible or delegate that responsibility to somebody else, but that person is still accountable for that person's actions. A classification or ontology model shows us the boundaries of a process and provides a shared understanding between people from different parts of an organisation. And the American Productivity and Quality Council Process Classification Framework has been around for about 25 years now and is an excellent way to classify the functions, processes, sub-processes and activities in a typical organization. There's a simpler model, which I call RARDAR: receive, assess, route, do, approve, release. And that can be used to unpick any process. It's important to have a simple classification scheme that business people can quickly understand. Each step in RARDAR can be decomposed. So if we look at the receive orders stage, we can see that that is satisfied by email, web form, fax, telephone, etc. So there are multiple ways to receive orders, and each one of these is another process. Classifying processes. The processes within a tangle need to be assessed. That requires expert judgment and knowledge to recognize which processes are suitable for reuse or modification, which have no value and should be discarded, and which missing processes need to be created. This stage may identify unauthorized workarounds that are process improvements and should be reused. If you have the trust of those in the process, Sidney Yoshida's bottom 100%, and you show that you're listening to them, then you will have more chance of finding those unauthorized process changes and their justification. Your role as an external consultant or business analyst may well be a benefit here. Processes should be categorized under functions and questions asked to understand if that process is an independent function, for example, receive payment, or an integral component of a larger sequential process, for example, build a circuit board and add that to a larger assembly. Subject matter experts may be required and time to interview them. Unpicking the process tangle reveals what's in it, why it's there, and if it's needed, and that can be shown in this 2x2 matrix. Processes approved for use within the business should then be formally registered within a process repository and placed under change control with a standardized description. That means a common business language. Untangling processes needs to be informed by knowledge of business plans and strategy. There's no point in improving something that may no longer be used. Processes or activities within a Tangle process path should be assessed and color-coded under the headings of use, modify, create, delete. I'll just give you a moment to look at that slide. And I see that my import from PowerPoint to Keypoint wasn't very successful there. But those blocks are receive, assess, route, do, approve, release. Connecting the processes. Other processes will typically be either side of this table, upstream and downstream. These need to be effectively connected together without tangles so that each transactional process step adds value rather than loops back, destroying value. Each of these columns must contain the processes that take the input from the previous stage and pass this output to the next. It's easy to deduce that there has to be a defined process for validating orders to produce the output validated sales order. Make sure that the connections between processes are at the same level, sibling to sibling. Preventing tangles. Well, an architecture model can define any configuration of parts or processes, from a toaster to an aeroplane. An architecture model holds everything together. It can be anything from the assembly of parts in a mobile phone, a Subway sandwich, or a Piper cup. Parts are combined into a system that performs a defined process. The component parts of the cub can be categorized as follows. Undercarriage, and then on the bottom left there, the components of the undercarriage, and then on the bottom right, the lower level detail of components, the nuts and bolts, fittings, etc. Every part is known and has a controlled and standardized specification. The parts catalog is a repository of standardized parts which allows their informed replacement. For example, all parts of the undercarriage are described and standardized. All the key parameters are known and controlled. so the diameter and tensile strength of bolts, fittings, control cables, etc. This allows consistent operations, safety and reliability in the use of replacement parts. So there are many Cubs still flying more than 80 years after their first flight. The same approach applies to maintaining business processes. Processes should be clearly defined using a common business language and referencing system so that they can be decomposed down to the level of detail required for repair, improvement and replacement. And here's a brief look at the APQC process classification scheme. So what we've got here is the processes for developing and managing products and services. See, that devolves down to 4 levels. It's a business architecture model, and it can be used to explain a business in terms of horizontal processes and vertical functions. It's designed as a framework and global standard to be customized for use in any organization. Just bear with me a moment. So the PCF does not list all the processes within a specific organization, and every process listed in the framework does not exist in all organizations, but it does provide a proven checklist of what processes and activities are typically there. So here's an example. This is how the framework may be used to define the assets and procedures as part of an infrastructure services operation. Using a common terminology to define generic processes reduces the risk of the same thing being described by several different names or incorrectly described, so that a process is duplicated in ignorance of the right one being available, and the risk of tangles is thus increased. Now, this next slide is important. Proceed with caution. Just because untangling a process makes business sense does not mean that it will be welcomed. Those that benefit from the tangles may resist and sabotage efforts to change or improve the process. Make sure that you have the appropriate metrics and analysis to support any proposals for change. Try and show bottom line financial benefits. Here are some of the risks. Whistleblowers generally lose their jobs after finding and publicising errors or fraud. To guard against tangles, short processes, control change, limited touch points, protect against external motion. Know what changes are coming and be proactive by having simple, lean processes that allow agile reactions. Listen to the people in the process. For those managers at the top of an organization who only see 4% of the problems, get out of your offices, go down to the factory floor, go to customer sites, stand behind a counter, and look at things from the perspective of those at the bottom of the organization. A few years ago, I went to Richer Sounds in Watford. Behind the counter was Julian Richer, serving customers. That man knows so much about his organization, it's not surprising he's a multimillionaire. Clear roles and responsibilities, RACI, and promote and actively support continuous improvement. I'm always surprised how many organizations just pay lip service to that. If you want culture change, involve those at the bottom of the process, give them a voice. And don't feed the tangle monster. There may be one hiding in your company. This is what they love. I'll give you a moment to read that. A recording of this webinar will be on the Black Metrics site, and Adrian will give you the details after this webinar. Business process tangles is a very big subject, and this webinar could not cover everything that I could say about tangles. So please join the dedicated Facebook site that I'm setting up to support discussion and exploration of business process tangles. And you can also visit my support website, businessprocesstangles.com. This next slide here gives you the 4 phases of dealing with business process tangles. Seeing that the tangles are there, exploring them, removing them, and preventing them. And that brings me now to the end of my prepared part of this webinar. I'll now hand over to Adrian for questions and answers.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And I know I'd had a sneak peek of the slides, but it was still fantastic to hear your stories there. So we we have time now for quick Q&A. So please, if you are live on the session, please do type your questions into the question window. And I see we have some questions coming in now. So Brian, the first question is around Six Sigma, which I know you're very, very well versed and experienced in. And the question is, how useful is Six Sigma in solving process tangles?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that a lot of the issues around tangles don't need the language of Six Sigma to find and fix them. It's best to speak to the people in the process, and these people on the factory floor, they won't necessarily know what pokiyoki, kaizen, and all these other Japanese jargon words are. And to me, that creates a barrier to knowledge and understanding. These people, Sidney Yoshida's 100%, know what's going wrong and the workarounds used to make a poor process work. Whereas a newly minted green belt or black belt may overcomplicate things and take longer to find issues and answers that could be produced in the 10-minute chat. I hope that answers that question sufficiently.
Definitely a really quite a big topic there. The next question is around elicitation. It's quite a broad question actually, so I'll sort of summarize it. But how, I guess the nub of it is how do you what kind of elicitation techniques might we use to get to the bottom of tangles? Because I guess we hear a lot about interviews and workshops, but are there other techniques that you would recommend that we use, Brian?
One of the most time-effective and cheapest options is to use SurveyMonkey for a quick electronic survey. For instance, I've been doing some work with a property company that has a number of property managers, and the issues that they have were quickly answered by sending out an electronic survey to them. And their responses showed things like insufficient training, systems that didn't work, contractors that weren't able to do the jobs that were required. All these things are sort of bubbling along below the surface of what management saw. So with that situation, people contact their own local suppliers and make unauthorized purchases. Things happen. People use their best efforts to satisfy their customers, but this results in tangles where nobody knows what's really happening, and at the end of the day, you may end up with contractors not being paid. So electronic surveys are very good, and of course going down, spending some time on the factory floor. Taiichi Ono, the father of the Toyota production system, had a technique where he would draw a chalk circle on the factory floor and have his new managers stand there for, it was either a day or a half a day, just to observe what was going on, to absorb the issues within that area.
Fantastic, and absolutely, observation is so crucial. And so a kind of interesting follow-up question to that is around specifically around going and seeing an observation. And again, I'm paraphrasing it here, but it's around, so I think the nub of it is sometimes people feel uncomfortable being observed, and that might mean that they act differently. So do you have any tips on on observing in a way that means we actually see how people genuinely work? Because I guess sometimes people revert to the official process when we go and see them.
That's a very good question. If you're going down to the factory floor or working behind the counter, dress like the rest, dress like, don't wear your business suit. Don't change your behavior. Don't sort of patronize them by trying to be one of the lads or one of the girls. They know that you're somebody investigating their processes. Treat them with respect, show that you're listening to them. And as the old saying goes, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So listen twice as much as you speak. If you are a external contractor, a consultant or a business analyst, then you are not likely to be seen as a threat to their careers. Again, what I've often done is, after meeting these people, I've set up an anonymous survey using SurveyMonkey that goes to my account, and I'll make it absolutely clear to them that what they say is their names are not going to be recorded. All I'll be looking at are the issues that they're reporting. And once you start doing that, you often find that this is the first time that those people have been listened to in terms of their ideas, their observations, and their issues. Just because somebody's wearing an overall doesn't mean they've got a brain. Doesn't mean they don't have a brain, rather, to put that right. And I say that with some conviction after spending 20 years on a factory floor myself. The saying there used to be, okay, come into work, hang your brain up, hang your coat up, put your overalls on. Life's not like that these days.
Wow, absolutely. Absolutely. So that really gaining an understanding, and as you say, the cultural symbols of dressing in a way and building rapport and really getting to the nub of the issue.
Oh, and just one thing to add, Adrian, make the tea for them as well.
Oh yeah, and bring the biscuits or the donuts or the cookies or whatever.
Biscuits break barriers.
Yeah, very true, very true. So the next question is quite a short one. So I think we'll probably have to interpret what the questioner means. That the question is, what about exceptions? And I'm imagining what they might be referring to is the fact that if we go and observe, we might only see a typical day, but we might not see all the exceptions. So any tips for getting to the exceptions, Brian?
Yeah, the exceptional workarounds may happen just once in the blue moon. But this is where you need to establish a rapport with those people, the 100%, so that they will take you into their confidence. Now, you can be, if you're lucky enough, get hold of data and do a data analysis to see the common cause and special cause events, but it's unlikely that you'll have a sufficient data sample size to see what's going on there. What can give you indications are customer satisfaction surveys. So, for instance, and TripAdvisor reports. So you can look at the, let's say, a restaurant that's got 4.5 stars. Most people are putting 5-star ratings, and then you may see a couple of 1-star ratings. The waitress or waiter was rude, etc. So these are exceptions to the process. We may see that somebody's baby needed a milk bottle warmed up or baby food warmed up, and the waiter or waitress went out of their way to do this for the customer. So again, that's an exceptional workaround to help the customer. And I hope that's answered it in some way.
Absolutely. Okay, another couple of chunky questions here, potentially quite tricky questions actually. So you may, I guess with these, you might need to perhaps take them offline to the Facebook group. But the first one is about using 6, because you mentioned the Toyota production system and by implication lean. What's your view on using Six Sigma and Lean simultaneously?
Personally, I think Six Sigma can often overcomplicate things. Lean is very simple to understand, and every high street, or nearly every high street, has an excellent example of lean in practice. That's a Subway sandwich store. You give your order, there's then a sequence of operations until you receive exactly what you want, perhaps in a couple of minutes. That is a very lean system. There's no wasted time. The correct tools are used. Yeah, so everything within Tim Wood, time, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overspecification, and delay. If you want to see Tim Wood in practice, have a look at a Subway sandwich store. So Six Sigma, it certainly has its place. I'm not against it. I think sometimes it can be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But that's an area which really could do with a little bit more development and discussion. So I would like to take that onto the Facebook site.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting when you were thinking about the Subway sandwich shop there, Brian. I was thinking I'd never really considered it this way before. Also, what Subway have done is they've created the ability to absorb quite a lot of variety and demand, because it's not like McDonald's where you go and you've got a fairly standard menu. So, for example, I really love chili peppers, and I have chili peppers on every sandwich I have in Subway, because they built a system that can handle that.
Yeah.
So it absorbs the variety and demand. So interesting.
Exactly, and that means that because of their materials menu, there is flexibility or controlled flexibility within the system.
Yes, yeah.
Prevents tangles.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, I've got a few comments about Subway coming in. Clearly, Subway is not to everyone's taste, which I fully accept. So,
restaurant of your choice, then.
Absolutely, yeah. The next question, again, potentially quite a big, chunky one, is around business architecture and business process management and enterprise architecture, and what's the difference? Because processes flow through them all. I mean, I don't know if you want to have a go at that one, Brian. It's quite a big question.
Yeah, I'll have a go at that, but we'll develop that on the Facebook page. So, business architecture shows the hierarchy of functions, process groups, processes, activities, records, etc. And the flow from left to right should be at peer-to-peer level. I can see in answering this, it's getting a little bit complicated. So no, I'll take that one offline and let's develop that on the Facebook page. But certainly having a structured way of managing your business processes, knowing what they are, what they connect to and why they connect, is a great way to ensure that you don't end up with tangles.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so next question is around quick wins, which is, I'm sure, an expression that we all hear in our working lives. And it's in a heavily bureaucratic environment. How do we help achieve a quick win?
A quick answer is get rid of the bureaucracy, but that's very difficult, isn't it? If you can show a financial benefit, for instance, if let's say a report is printed on paper, there are 5 copies and only 1 copy is needed, and that's produced every week, then you can quite simply equate how much that would cost per year and suggest that they stop doing that. And there are some places I've worked in where people still like paper reports. I can't think of anything else very quickly there, but there are a lot of things done historically in organizations because nobody's ever stepped back and said, well, why are we doing this? So encouraging people to ask why is a very good way of getting rid of things that aren't needed. Now, having said that, asking why can be a dangerous question. And I've likened process improvement to a minefield. If you ask these questions, you can end up getting into dangerous territory. So use your discretion. If you're asking a question of something that is perhaps somebody's pride and joy, somebody who's high up in the organization, then ask another question somewhere else.
Absolutely. And Brian, as you were speaking there, I was thinking of another potential example. Be interested to know whether you found the same, but sometimes I found in highly bureaucratic environments, if there's some way of doing a pilot or some thin slice of value so you can almost prove it, and sometimes in quite an informal way. So, you know, and you know, I hate to use the term below the radar, but, you know, like off the side of the desk type of thing, but proving the value and then perhaps using that as the business case to either transverse to get through the bureaucracy or to transcend it in some way. So I don't know if you found similar, Brian.
Well, yes, I have actually, Adrian. So I used to work for a national IT cabling company and would visit the office in Scotland every now and then. So I was able to develop and prove a process in the Scotland office, which I was then able to roll out to the rest of the UK operation. So yeah, having that below the radar opportunity works well. It's a sort of skunk works approach even.
Absolutely. Okay, so next question, again, quite a short question around decomposition, and it's around how far to decompose. So I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but it's like how do we know how far to decompose? Because you could go to it. I mean, you could theoretically go to every move of the pen or every move of the hand, but at what point? How do we know at what point to stop decomposition?
Right, that's not a quick one to answer, but basically you're looking at process chunks. So let's say there's a process chunk for paying a contractor. Now, to pay the contractor, you will receive a purchase order against an invoice. You will confirm that the work has been done, and then you will approve payment. So those bits of the process, you don't need to go down to any lower level if they're working properly. So you decompose down to the level where you can see a problem.
Absolutely. So that almost iterative decomposition until you find it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So great. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, so how can people stay in touch with you, Brian? Because I'm sure people will be interested and will want to continue the conversation. How's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, if I can just roll back a couple of slides,
Mm-hmm.
Those are my contact details. And I've just set up a Facebook site. So I would really welcome some further discussion on that because business process tangles is a very wide area and there's not a lot about it on the web. So any contribution to the discussion is something I would really value.
Fantastic. And also, just to let everyone know who's live on the webinar, there'll be an email sent out after the webinar with a link to that Facebook group. And in fact, when you exit the webinar, there'll be an exit page, which will have a link on as well. So fantastic. So Brian, if you could just take us to the final slide, because really all that is left for us to say is a massive thank you. Massive thank you to you, Brian. I've been really looking forward to this webinar and just I've got so many ideas spinning around in my head now, so thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us, and I'm really looking forward to speaking further in the Facebook group. Thank you also to everyone who's dialed in and has attended live. Really the purpose of this webinar series is to create discussions and to really provide the opportunity for ideas perhaps a little bit beyond what we would normally talk about in the BA community to be sort of cultivated. So our next webinar is around design thinking, and we're going to be joined by Ingrid and Peter Gersbach. who are dialing in from Vienna. If you happen to be in Austria, by the way, Ingrid and Peter run fantastic workshops. There's also an annual BA business analysis camp, which you should definitely check out. Peter's company, Gersbach Business Analysis, runs that. It's on the 30th of November at 6:30 UK time. You will get an email with this on. Also, as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available. It tends to take us about 24 hours to get it online, but again, the email will go out today with that link in. But there's a survey which you'll be sent after the session. I would really appreciate it if you just take a couple of minutes to fill that out. There's 3 questions, but one of the questions is around what topics you'd like to hear about. So actually someone had suggested processes and process problems, which is really led to me reaching out to Brian. So please do, if you have any ideas, pop them in the survey there. So again, thank you very much. Good evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, and look forward to welcoming you on another webinar at some point soon.